home bakers, it's Jack Sturgis here for That Is My Second Name at bakewithjack.co.uk, and this week is Bread SOS episode 1. Roll it. Hello to you and welcome back to the Bake with Jack YouTube channel. If you missed last week's announcement, you might be surprised to hear that we are now operating a Bake with Jack Bread SOS service right here in the underground bunker at Bake with Jack Castle. That's right, 101 of you sent emails to the Bread SOS service email inbox, and I've been sifting through every one of them to get to the heart of the most common bread making problems you're facing today. Let me first apologise if I don't address your particular issue in this week's video, but we'll be doing this over the coming weeks and hopefully I'll touch upon something useful. But come on, there's a lot of them. I will do my best to cover the most important issues each week, and so this week I have been bombarded with the same question over and over again. You probably already know what that question is. You're probably asking it yourself, and we probably already know why that question is so important at the moment. And so without further ado, the good news is I found somewhere you can get some flour. A mystical, magical place called eBay. Okay, all jokes aside, I'm sad. And when I'm sad, I make jokes. I'm sorry about that, but I'm sad because I probably can't give you the answer that you need, which is where on earth to get some flour at the moment. But what I will do in this week's video is try my best to help you out with your lack of flour and flour substitution issues at the moment. At the end of this video, I'm going to bundle everything up into a little summary for you, so please make sure you stay to the end, or if you get bored in the middle, just skip to the end. And if this is helpful to you, consider sharing it out with your bread making pals, because it might be helpful to them in this time too. So here goes. I've got a clipboard with everything on. Let's go. Okay, first up, Sarah from Northern Ireland. I've been making bread for 3 years now, sourdough for 2. I always tune in for the weekly bread making tips. Nice one. They've been super helpful. Thanks, my pleasure. I've got some plain, self-raising and spout flour in the cupboard. I can't get any strong white flour or even coarse wholemeal for making soda bread. I've seen focaccia recipes with all-purpose flour. Could I use plain? You can make bread with plain flour. I've got some proving up right now because I thought it might be really useful if I try some stuff out to show you, and I'll try and get you an extra additional bonus video. But have a think about plain flour for a minute. Plain flour is lower on gluten than strong white bread flour. You make a loaf with strong white bread flour, it's high in gluten, which means it's really elasticy and really strong dough. The dough puffs up really big, and that's how you get a nice puffy light bread. If you're using plain flour, it's going to get delicate at a sooner point of the puff. It's not going to reach maximum puff like a strong white flour bread would do. In theory, you can completely use it, but your bread's going to be not as light and fluffy as you probably would have liked. So keep your eye on it when it's proving, and probably bake it sooner, but you can bake bread with plain flour. In terms of soda bread, you can literally use whatever you want in soda bread. I use soda bread as a way of just using stuff up out of the cupboard. Just keep in mind that if you are switching a recipe from wholemeal flours predominantly to white flours, you might want to adjust the hydration, take the liquid down a little bit, otherwise it might get a little bit too sloppy because it won't be as absorbent as normal. With your spout flour, I would personally cut your bread with spout flour. If it's wholemeal, you can do 100% wholemeal loaf of bread, and I've got one of those proving up now as well, a spout 100% wholemeal bread. But what I would do is I would use it to cut your plain flour. If you want to make a plain flour bread and cut in 20% of your wholemeal spout, that would make a really nice bread in terms of flavour and texture. I hope that helps. Next. Okay, next up, Liz in Australia. Although normally a UK resident, I'm currently in Australia where the shelves have been stripped as in the UK. So I have only plain flour, no bread flour, no wholemeal flour, also no vital wheat gluten, which I could add to plain flour to get bread flour. Yeah, okay, understand that concept. I'm getting little or no oven spring, which I'm putting down to the lack of gluten. Is there any workaround to get the spring, or do I have to put up with a relatively dense sourdough bread? You have to put up with it. If it was a yeasted bread, I would say rest it for longer so that the flour gets more chance to absorb the moisture and there's more chance for the gluten to develop. However, you're already making sourdough bread, which takes ages. And so in my mind, that all that time would allow the gluten to develop as much as it could do. So the answer is either one, put up with a denser sourdough bread because that is the nature of plain flour, or two, don't put up with it and make something else with your plain flour. There's loads of things you can make with your plain flour. You can make a normal yeasted loaf of bread if you want to. You can make tortillas, pittas, noodles, pasta, crackers, breadsticks. There's loads of stuff you can do with it, which is not sourdough bread. Maybe take a break from your sourdough if you're unhappy with it. It's a lot of work to put in something that you're unhappy with. Make all those all different things and enjoy those for a bit, and then rejoice when bread flour comes back. Next up, we have Lauren from Banbury in Oxfordshire. Hey Lauren, doesn't Banbury sound like a lovely place to be? I feel like it's just somewhere out in the sticks where the sun is always shining something beautiful. I don't know. Thanks for doing this. It's a really great idea and just what we need right now. Well, you're welcome. I'm full of them. I'm quite new to baking bread, and given the current circumstances, I'm worried about not being able to buy my normal things like bread, but also ingredients. I would like to know a couple of things. In order to make any kind of bread, do you have to use bread flour? Also, can I freeze homemade bread? Good question. Freezing would be useful right now, but I'm not sure if that's possible. Okay, there's a reason why we use bread flour for bread, because the properties of bread flour are well suited to what we want in our desired bread in terms of lightness and airiness. You can completely make bread with other flours, and I'm working on that video right now, but the qualities of the flour will have a lesser effect on the bread in terms of puff. It will likely be heavier, not as puffy and light and fluffy as what you want it to be normally, but that's just the nature of the game. It's completely possible. And yes, you can freeze a loaf of bread. Just pop it in your freezer, wrap it up in cling film, pop it in your freezer, and when you're ready for it, get it out the day before. If you need bread tomorrow, get it out the day before, leave it on your kitchen side, let it defrost. If you want to, you can pop it into the oven for 10 or so minutes at about 180°C or something, just to get the crispiness back. But I find if you freeze it pretty soon after it's cooled down and just take it out overnight, remove the cling film in the morning, it's pretty good and crusty as it was. Sometimes I refresh it a little bit and sometimes I don't feel the need. I hope that helps. Scott from Philadelphia says, love your weekly videos. They inspire me to bake bread for my friends and family every week. Isn't this a nice ego stroking exercise? I don't have a specific baking issue, but more of a resource problem. I usually stock my pantry with all-purpose flour, white bread flour, spelt, whole wheat, rye, etc, etc. Regular all-purpose and bread flour is hard to come by at my grocery store right now. But I've got plenty of wholemeal and specialty grains in my backstock. Do you have any tips for baking without all-purpose bread flour and still getting a fluffy loaf with lots of puff? I feel your pain, okay? But step number one is to accept you're not going to get a fluffy loaf with lots of puff out of those flours, because they have different characteristics. I know that it's sad, but this is the whole point. And if they all made the same loaf, they wouldn't be different. Develop an appreciation for the deliciousness of these flours. You can make bread out of them, and it will have different characteristics that are delicious in their own right, and they serve a purpose on their own. Wholemeal spout flour has different properties to everything, right? It spreads a little bit more, but the wholemeal keeps everything together. You can make a nice loaf out of it following the same things that you normally would do. Rye flour has little or no gluten depending on who you speak to, but either way there's no structure and there's no anything, okay? You can make bread with that. It's slightly different. It requires no kneading because there's nothing to knead, and no structure building because there's no structure to be built. And again, I'm working on this for an emergency video that I hope to get out this week as well. In terms of wholemeal, I think you said whole wheat flour. I did 2 videos recently. The last 2 bread tips, 136 and 137, will help you to understand wholemeal flour and what to do with it and go from then. You can soak stuff first to make sure it absorbs the moisture and the gluten that is there develops to its full potential. You can rest things overnight, which I hope to talk about soon as well. But you can completely do it. You just have to appreciate the fact it's not going to be your light and fluffy loaf. And sorry, I wish I could tell you the answer and go, oh yeah, you can make completely. Yeah, of course you can. Just do this and this and this and it'll be exactly the same. But it's really not. That's why we have strong white bread flour in the pantry. in the first place. Lucy in Kingsley, Hants. If Hants means Hampshire, which I think that it does, unless that's a different place, that's where I was born and where I spent the first 18 years of my life. How lovely is that? How I've made successful sourdough using strong white flour and now have only strong wholemeal flour, spout flour and rye flour. Can I still use your sourdough recipe? In theory, yes, but you're going to have to make some tweaks. Normally, flours like strong wholemeal flour, spout flour and rye, I would cut with strong white bread flour, but we ain't got any. Okay, so what I would do is this. I'd use your rye for your starter, because I use rye for my starter always, and I really like it. It's really robust. Use your rye for your starter. If you only have these flours, you're going to need to up the hydration a little bit. I would use strong wholemeal flour. And if you want to get the more bread out of that, if you want to preserve your strong wholemeal bread flour, you can cut it with 20% spout along the way, because spout on its own tends to spread quite a bit. So I would use your strong wholemeal flour and cut it with a 20% or 50% even spout flour and see how you get on. Video number 137 is going to be useful for you because it will explain what you need to do to your wholemeal flour. But expect a heavier loaf. It's going to be heavier. Here's something you can do. Here's an idea for you, okay? If you've only got wholemeal flours about, like strong wholemeal flour, and you don't want to make a loaf that's too heavy, what you can do is put it through a sieve. And you saw it in video 136, okay? Put your flour through the sieve and sift out some of that bran. The finer the sieve, the more the bran you'll get out, and the closer you'll become to having actual white flour. Okay, but it might help just sifting out some of that bran to relieve some of the weight inside of the flour and to help you get a light loaf, although it won't be what you're used to, but it will be light. You're going to have to, if you're using my sourdough recipe, video 101, you're going to have to up the hydration slightly to accommodate for your wholemeal flour, perhaps 30 to 40 grams extra water, but don't, do as much as you're comfortable with. Perhaps maybe start with 20 and then the next time use 30 and see how you get on, what you're comfortable with. It shouldn't need to soak any longer because sourdough is a long process anyway, and your bread's going to be different. Okay, you might, through this process now, discover the best bread you've ever tasted. I hope so. Deborah, who is probably in Guildford, if you're the Deborah that I think that you are. No bread woes here as yet, but I've been feeling like there will be. We met last year when you came to do a workshop in my home for my daughter and her friends. Yes, I remember. I've been using your sourdough recipes with great success for some time now. I've never had a bad one, and I've progressed to delicious seeded one too. Nice one. However, I can no longer find the wholemeal rye to feed my starter. In my store cupboard, I have strong wholemeal, buckwheat, and strong white bread flour. What would be the best to use? I don't want to ruin my 100% success rate. That would be heartbreaking. Okay, so to feed your starter with, if your starter is rye already and you have only wholemeal flour, buckwheat flour, or strong white bread flour in the cupboard, what I would default to is the wholemeal flour, because wholemeal rye and wholemeal flour will share some of the same qualities. They both got all that outside stuff on, which I believe sourdough starters really thrive upon. However, what I would do is the following. I wouldn't just feed it all up with wholemeal flour. I would take a little bit of that rye starter out, stash it in the freezer or dry it out somehow, and keep that as your backup. Because in my mind, I want to keep my rye starter pure, if you like, uncontaminated, if you want to put it that way, until we can get some, because that's the most reliable way I feel like of doing it. You can, of course, use wholemeal bread flour to feed your starter with, but do it separately. Take a little bit of rye and stash it somewhere for emergency time, okay? And then take another bit of your rye and feed it up with wholemeal flour. I would use the wholemeal flour 100%. I wouldn't go to strong white bread flour because everything gets a little bit acidic that way and things are a little bit quick moving, and I feel like all the good stuff is in that wholemeal flour. Incidentally, this will transform the flavour of your sourdough bread, which is a nice way to learn. Isn't that a nice little benefit, something we can learn in this time? I think so. Don from Milwaukee, isn't that an Indian name? Jack, I've been following you for almost 2 years now and I never miss your Thursday videos. This is not a really big problem, but I have a lot of strong white bread flour in my pantry. Hey, don't tell people your address, they'll be banging in the door. I've just run out of all-purpose flour and I can't leave my house to try and find some. I plan on using the bread flour for the many recipes that I call for all purpose. What difference can I expect in the results? All right, so strong white bread flour's got more gluten in it, right, in whatever you make with it, okay, for stuff like sauces and things like that. It's great. I can use it, I'll use it in sauces, no problem. If it's all I got, I use it, make a bechamel sauce or whatever, or thicken something up or whatever. And it's fine, it'll probably be a little bit more silky. But if you think about it, when you do making pastry and stuff like this and biscuits, everything you do is complete opposite, and cake, to making bread, okay, in that you're trying not to work the gluten during the process. That's why we rub the flour with butter before we add the moisture when we're making pastry, and that's why we beat up the eggs and the butter and the sugar in the cake mixture and then put the flour in and just fold it in the end, because you're trying not to develop the gluten. As long as you're following recipes and you have that principle in mind and you're trying not to develop the gluten by doing all those different things, you shouldn't really have a problem. You are in a bit more danger of gluten developing during that process and leading to a chewy pastry or biscuits or a tough cake that doesn't puff up very much. But as long as you follow the recipe and follow the principles as they are, you should be okay. Right, it's Lindsay in Scotland. Hi Jack, my name is Lindsay. I live in Scotland. I've been baking your sourdough recipe scrapings method because I am a Scot and frugal. Nice. I always used Dove's organic flour, but I couldn't get it. Used another cheaper organic flour one time. Results are not so good. My question is, I have other Dove flours like white spelt and white rye. I know I can use these, but will I need to add more or less water? All right. Finding it hard to source all our regular baking produce. Sorry, Jack, but who the flip is doing all this baking? I can't answer that question, I'm afraid. The whole world, by the looks of things. White spelt and white rye flours are different beasts, because spout flour, let me give you an example. Spout flour is gluten is a little bit more extendable, which means the bread spreads a little bit. When you're using wholemeal spout flour, you've got the benefit of those wholemeal bits and bobs that hold everything together a little bit more. When you just use white, which I have done in the past, a long time ago, it literally spreads out like a pancake because there's nothing to hold it together. It spreads far away, and it just keeps going. It's mind-boggling. I feel like white spout flour is a flawed concept. I haven't found something good to do with it. I haven't experimented that much with it, but on principle, I don't feel like it's very useful for much at all unless you're going to cut it with something else. And white rye flour, again, I've cut that with wholemeal rye flour to make a lighter rye loaf before, but I've never used it by itself, and that is probably your worst bet. If you directly swapped out white flour for white spout flour, everything's going to spread like crackers. It's beyond my capabilities. If you use rye flour that's white, everything's just going to be almost like a batter mix with no structure, no gluten or whatsoever. So I wouldn't do that either. If you have other brands of flour, other brands of strong white bread flour that you're not so happy with their results, that's probably your best bet, because that has the qualities that you need in order to make nice bread. You might take a little bit of tweaking your recipe, a little bit of change, a little bit of practice and refining, but you make something way better. I would stay away from white spelt flour, and I would stay away from white rye flour. And so, to summarise, if you have strong white bread flour, if you have some, try and cut it with something else for a bit. 20% wholemeal, 50% wholemeal, 20 or 50% wholemeal spelt flour, or cut it with 20% rye flour to eke out your stash for just a little bit longer. It will make a slight and very lovely difference in flavour, and it shouldn't, in those quantities, affect the structure that much. Make your bread last by making longer loaves. You get more slices out of it that way. It might sound like the most obvious thing in the world, but it's something I did recently on Instagram with my son. Make smaller rolls and get more rolls out of your mixture to make your bread flour stash last a little bit longer. Don't eat so much bread. It's probably the wrong thing to say on this channel, but there are loads of other things you can eat that are delicious, like noodles or rice or pasta or couscous or risotto or polenta. There are loads of delicious things out there. Please don't feel the pressure to provide your family with fresh bread for breakfast, lunch and dinner every single day of the week. It might surprise you. I don't actually eat that much bread all the time. The bread I do eat is fresh and real bread, but there's a lot of other things that I eat as well. And this has been on my mind for a long time. Don't feel that pressure to provide for your family too many bread meals every single day. Value what you can make and what you do have by not having it all the time and not putting your pressure on yourself to produce as much of bread as you would normally buy. If you only have plain flour, try making a loaf with it and see how you get on. I've got one proving up right now that I hope to show you in that follow-up video. Consider other delicious things you can make with your flour, like flour tortillas or crackers or breadsticks or pita breads. Think of things that are more suited to the flour that you have, things that require less puff and less gluten structure to create that puff. Google some recipes, they are literally everywhere. Accept that life is different now and we have to adapt and change to that. I don't think I fully accepted that until a couple of days ago. I thought to myself, let's do this Bread SOS thing for a little while. And in the meantime, while everything's gone crackers, and then when it all blows over and everything settles down again, we can go back to normal. And I'm sure it will blow over, but I needed to accept that things are difficult now and I have to change to suit that. My kids likely won't go back to school now until September. I've got some real thinking to do to figure out our way through that, make sure everybody's happy in the meantime and we got what we need. Somebody must have flour out there, and yes, there are probably some people that have bought a ton of it and stashed it away because when everything hit the fan, they freaked out and felt like that's what they needed to do. But please don't get hung up on the image of that person. I hear a lot of talk of they, like they bought up all the flour and they stockpiled it all in their cupboards and they're idiots and they're probably not even bakers in the first place and all the bread that they bought will probably wind up in the bin in 3 months' time. I don't doubt that there's those kind of people out there, but maybe having the flour in the cupboard helps them to feel safe and secure, and maybe they're actually using it. There are good, honest people out there buying flour who never bought flour before. The people that want to make bread hedgehogs with their kids now their kids are not in school and they can learn about the process and they can learn about patience and they can truly understand the value of the food that we all buy and eat without even thinking. Let's not just assume that they are selfish and they have deliberately stitched me up for their own wants or needs and they have left me with nothing. Consider instead the mum who is at home on rainy day number 1 out of 150 trying to keep her kids entertained and baking bread while Dr. Daddy is out working in the hospital 25/8 trying to save people's lives, you know? Apologies for the rant, but it's a shame if people's default is to get angry at the fictional people called they. Listen, some people out there have flour, yeah? Try it. Why don't you ask your neighbour for a bag of flour? They might throw a bag over your fence. You can make 3 loaves out of it. Keep one for yourself. Throw one back over the fence of your kind neighbour to repay the favour, and throw one over the fence of another neighbour, making you the kind neighbour. Maybe this lack of flour situation can bring us all closer together and encourage kindness between one another. Once again, apologies if I didn't answer your question today. Please keep them coming to breadsos@bakewithjack.co.uk and I will continue to bring you the most common answers I can find in my brain that hopefully helps you out. I hope this has helped you out. I feel like it's been a whole video of me going, I don't know, or no, sorry, probably not. But I hope it's helped you out. I'm going to bring you another one. I'm going to try my best to bring you another one this week about the differences in flours and the differences it makes in the final bread in one format or another, whatever's possible. Listen, thank you for stopping here every single week for your weekly video. This has been Bread SOS episode 1 and I'll see you soon for another one. Bye-bye. And there it is, Bread SOS episode 1. I don't know how useful you're going to find this stuff. Okay, we're all just winging it here. So listen, let me know in the comments box underneath if this was helpful to you or not. Let me know. That'll be really handy. And don't forget, you can still get all my content from the week free in your inbox every single Thursday in your Home Bakers Bulletin. Sign up in the link underneath. See you next week.